Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Eastern Mediterranean Times podcast. I'm your host, Martin Mont.
And I'm your host, Joshua Litke.
All right, our first story today concerns the U.S. State Department and its sale of arms to Israel. Now, they worked around a congressional deal. Congress has bogged down any arms deals between the United States and Ukraine, the United States and Israel, and it's basically over monetary concerns. But the Department of Defense and the State Department have worked out a roundabout way to get some funds to Israel. The funds include $650 million of sales in tank munitions for the defense of Israel, which includes 6,900 rounds of tank munition and technical support as well as spare parts. Now, these munitions come as the second wave of attacks after the ceasefire that was for a couple of days, a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Came to a close. The fighting has increased in southern Gaza, and the United States making this deal.
Yeah, the United States here is it's looking to defend its allies on some level and looking to, we see this with their vote in the United Nations against an immediate ceasefire to the conflict, that the United States is certainly looking for an end to this war, hoping for an end to this war, as we could see by the previous ceasefire deal that was crafted by, in large, the United States. And as well as their humanitarian activities in regards to the Palestinians in Gaza. But at the same time, they're looking to preserve that critical alliance with Israel and looking to ensure that whatever ceasefire and whatever end to this conflict it will be beneficial for Israel, will be beneficial for U.S. interests abroad.
Absolutely. And Secretary Anthony Blinken coming out and saying that this is a very important for America's defense and for the defense of its American allies, and the perception that the United States will come to the defense of its allies, and that's a big part of this. That's the global footprint needs to be withheld, even though the global community and the United Nations, as you alluded to, coming together and saying there needs to be an end to the conflict. The United States saying, look, we defend our allies.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. Our next story concerns Egypt, and it is holding presidential elections today and for the next 2 days, from December 10th to 12th. The National Election Authority announced that the elections will be held earlier than they had been anticipated to be held. The current president, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, is eligible to run again after a constitutional adjustment during his term allowed for a longer term limit. There are a couple other candidates in the race, but al-Sisi definitely the forerunner as an incumbent here.
For sure. It's also, we're looking at a country that, in Egypt, the systems of governance have been leaning more towards an authoritarian track, have been moving more towards a move away from democracy and that spirit of the Arab Spring to something more akin to authoritarianism. And the existing incumbent president, he's definitely going to be looking to ensure that he remains in power. That's why these constitutional changes happened. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all with the results if this is a incumbent landslide election.
Absolutely. Again, Egypt facing high poverty numbers, high income inequality. They're facing also an import problem because they don't have a good amount of foreign reserves. And so they don't have the buying power in the foreign exchange market to get imports for cheap. They have a large loss of arable land, so They have to import a lot of their food into the country, and especially after the war in Ukraine, which was regarded as the breadbasket of Africa, the breadbasket of the Middle East, that hurt their supply even further, and prices have skyrocketed. 30% of the population, again, under the poverty line, and an additional 30% is considered to be vulnerable to poverty. And food insecurity and energy insecurity is at the root of those problems.
Yeah, with immigration crises, the climate crisis, Egypt, and of course, as you've stated, the economic crisis that's happening in Egypt. It'll be interesting to watch this election, and one thing that I would watch is the turnout. That's definitely a telling sign. If there's higher turnout, and that turnout is favoring Sisi, then that usually would say that the people are okay with the president, even in that more authoritarian structure. It usually gives a hint to that they're at least somewhat satisfied with the status quo, maybe looking for change and reform, but at least satisfied with the leadership and what they're saying. But if there's really low turnout, then that would be a signifier that people are just not engaging in this kind of a system because they know the result and they don't want that result.
Absolutely. Moving on to our next story concerning Greece and Turkey, and they're looking to cool tensions between the two countries, especially in the Aegean, but also just geopolitically in general.
Yes.
And they're looking to forge a new relationship to go into the coming year.
Yeah, Prime Minister Mitsotakis of Greece and President Erdogan of Turkey met this week and signed a declaration of friendship with the intent to cool that rivalry that has been heating up in the region, especially over geographical land claims and borders, which has even provoked some talks about military escalation in the region. But now we're seeing them trying to move back, cool those tensions down, restore a more friendly or diplomatic aspect of their relationship, trying to look for further cooperation on regional issues and goals, and creating a mutually beneficial relationship. Some of the big takeaways is we're seeing Turkey is trying to definitely secure its trade routes in the Eastern Mediterranean for natural gas. That's going to be a really critical thing that this new friendship deal secures for them. And Greece is hoping that with an easing of tensions, they can decrease military spending, secure their borders and their geographical claims, and also address the immigration issue, as Turkey is one of the critical stopgaps for the immigration crisis in Europe.
Absolutely. And this also comes as Turkey's looking to have less border conflict surrounding Turkey itself. As a state, on their southern border, they're dealing with Syria, and they've had military escalation in Syria, especially in the past month,
Yes.
which means that they're focusing a lot of efforts in that region. On the east of Turkey, we have the entire Caucasus region, which has also been in conflict, and Turkey's been very involved there. They also have trade routes and economic interests through the Caucasus that they would like to be focusing on. And turning to the Aegean, those conflicts are being seen as less necessary, more costly, and a friendship that will end those conflicts will allow Turkey to migrate a lot of its focus to these other fronts
Yes.
surrounding its country to be able to secure those, especially a border with Syria, because as you said, Turkey's a stopgap for migration. A lot of that migration is coming up from the Middle East through Syria, and being able to have that contiguous zone that they currently hold, the 5-mile border zone, that's an important aspect of Turkish policy in Syria, and they're looking to maintain that, but it's taking a lot more resources. So they'll have to be moving those resources away from the Aegean.
Yeah, and building that relationship with Greece, both NATO countries, it's very critical for security and for international relations abroad. Turkey taking a stance that's less inclined to support Israel in the current Israel-Gaza and Hamas conflict. This definitely could repair some of the broken bonds between Turkey and its Western NATO allies.
Absolutely. And now moving on to our last story today, which concerns the COP28 summit. It continues into this week, but there's been a lot of argument and a lot of refusal by some organizations to even accept what's been going on there. However, there has been gains in some fields like food security, Do you want to give me a little bit more on that, Josh?
Yeah, of course. So COP28 addressing climate change, and with the ultimate goal of finding global cooperation and curbing climate change. It's still happening in Dubai. There is definitely a legitimacy gap, as you were saying, in regards to the conference, considering it's happening in Dubai. It's being run by oil executives.
And the next one is going to be held most likely in Azerbaijan,
Yes,
which
so
makes that even worse.
yeah, so it's essentially we're just building on this massive legitimacy gap that people are starting to see COPE as more of a joke and more of a means to take a lot of time to talk about things and then not back it up with any actual meaningful action. However, in spite of that, there are little things that are still happening at COP28 where there has been means of progress. We talked about climate financing last time around. Now, food insecurity is something that was on the table, and we saw some moves even from our Eastern Mediterranean region, Italy contributing 10 million euros to a fund to ensure that there would be more sustainable agriculture in Africa, as well as 5 million euros for renewable energy for smallholders and villages in Africa.
Absolutely, and those concerns over agricultural goals and food security, that's linked very closely with climate change, and the Eastern Med has seen that in tremendous numbers
Yes.
this year, because you see the crops that have been so crucial to the economies of the Eastern Med, such as olives, such as grapes, those economies are hurting
Yep.
bad due to climate change, and coming up with better sustainable ways to still harvest those crops domestically, that's something that these countries have realized is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And now turning onto the global scale, they're recognizing it more. It's something that's in the mindset. And when other countries, such as countries in Africa, bring up, hey, we have food insecurity too, an investment into sustainable agriculture would help alleviate some of that.
Yeah.
It's landing on much more open ears now than it has in the past, because those
Yes.
problems are being reciprocated northern.
Yes. Well, I think that what we're seeing right now is because fossil fuels and the normal arguments that are made at a COPE meeting are so not in the question and not really, or are being pushed out of the conference. We're looking at like countries like Italy and other countries that are looking to say, hey, if we're not going to address fossil fuels, and if this is going to be like a sticking point that right now is a massive debate but likely won't go anywhere, let's start looking at things like sustainable agriculture, climate financing, these smaller items that usually aren't making the flashy headlines are becoming more talked about.
Absolutely.
So potentially a small positive from this, if we're trying to look at it from an optimistic lens.
Absolutely. And there's big players in the picture, and those big players are still contributing funds to the conference, and Greece and Italy specifically trying to close that legitimacy gap as much as possible. Mitsotakis was there.
Yes.
He was speaking, and that goes to show you that these countries, especially smaller countries, and especially in places like the Eastern Med that have been hit very hard by climate change, they don't have another means of communicating their needs and their communities' desires on the global stage. They need a conference like the COP conference.
Oh yes, of course.
And they're very adamant that this type of thing needs to stay around. The United States, less so adamant. President
Yes.
Biden wasn't there. The Vice President Kamala Harris was there.
Yes.
But the president not being there goes to show that the COP conference earlier this year didn't really go anywhere. The conversation this time around is similar, and especially the G7 losing a lot of interest. But these smaller states saying, no, this needs to continue. Some avenue of conversation needs to continue. It's crucial.
Yes, the G7 has kind of taken the approach of let's do it our way, like with the Green Climate Fund, which the United States contributed an extra $3 billion to, that they announced at this COP28. But that's not going through United Nations avenues or like typical global avenues. That's through a G7 fund. So we're looking at the G7 saying we're going to invest We're still going to be active players on the global stage with climate change, but we're going to do it our way. Small states definitely are still looking to cope as a means where they can still voice their opinions and try to at least work with groups like the G7 to get their opinions heard.
Absolutely. All right. That has been This Week in the Eastern Mediterranean. Thank you again for tuning in, and as always, have a great rest of your week. I've been Martin Mont.
I've been Joshua Litsky.
Have a great week.